There's always, for me, been a certain set of drivers that have existed, and I've tried to stay as true and aware of them as I can. In simple terms, the original thing was just sort of this feeling of wanting to be able to serve a greater good.
Mm.
I truly believe there was something in the world that was much bigger than I am, and I want to be a part of that. So I've tried to stay conscious. I've tried to keep that channel open and the dial turned on and pay attention and realize sometimes if I found myself in a situation I was feeling maybe particularly frustrated or downhearted about it, when I thought about it, I realized I had started taking a detour off the path I wanted to be on, and I
Mm.
would need to kind of come back to center and get that done.
Welcome to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner, a show about shifting our individual and collective beliefs on what is possible for the future of humanity. As our understanding of how our reality continues to shift, we are at a point of reunification between science and spirituality. What does the world look like when we break free from the generational trauma that has kept most humans playing small for thousands of years and step into our full power as the co-creators of this reality? I always ask that you keep an open mind with this podcast. Ask yourself what resonates with my truth at this time and what does not. Respect your intuition, but see if you can get through the whole show because there might be that little nugget buried deep in the conversation that unlocks something for you. All right, everyone, welcome back to another fascinating episode of Changing the Channel. I have a wonderful guest today. His name is Doug Thorpe, and he is a coach, consultant, advisor, and confidant. He's a former Army officer, and he's turning business battles into victories. He also hosts his own podcast, Leadership Powered by Common Sense, which I had the joy of being on a little bit earlier this week. So it was really nice. We get to swap and just deepen this conversation. So welcome to this show. Really appreciate you coming on, Doug.
Hey, Joe, thank you. And you're right. I certainly enjoyed your time on my show and look forward to this one.
Beautiful. So just give us a little bit of background. I mean, you're a multifaceted human. Give us a little background of how you went from officer in the Army all the way to, consulting and coaching in the higher levels of the business world.
Yeah. For me, the journey was, as I look back on it, was kind of a patchwork quilt of a lot of different experiences and some of them running in parallel. And I didn't realize it or know it at the time, but it all kind of started to gel and converge over the years. Um, I, I tell the story. I've always been intrigued by the concept of leadership, even before I understood that it exists and what it is about. We have a joke in my family. I was captain of the fifth grade crossing guard in my school days. Back in my day, we sent kids out in traffic with stop signs to be the crossing traffic control people. That would be unheard of, and it would be blasphemous in the modern world to think about putting a kid in peril like that. But nobody ever got hurt. It was all just fine. We got through it. But it was a service organization at my school, and I just admired, what they did, and I aspired to be on that team and ultimately be able to lead that team. And that all came to pass, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that kind of set the torch for me. I, as school years went on, I was always looking for opportunity in extracurricular activities to be part of some organization or club or event. And inevitably, if there was a need to have a team leader or a, president of the club, I would always raise my hand. And when I look back on it, it was never about ego or anything. It was just this innate sense of service. And, I wanted to try to serve a greater good. And it seemed to work. So I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and at the time we had 5 military bases. It was hard to get the military off your mind. And I set my goal on becoming a career Army officer. And I did go to college on an Army scholarship and subsequently was commissioned and went directly into service. But 6 years after going in, I decided that wasn't really the career path I wanted to be on after all. So I exited the military, went looking for a job, wasn't sure what I wanted to do really. I had been a business major in college, just as I thought that was a good fallback position if the military didn't pan out. But I got hired by a large regional bank in the Houston area, and I joined the management team immediately. Because of my military experience, I was hired straight into a management training program and immediately became a supervisor of a group. And 20 years later, I was still climbing the ladder there, running different parts of the organization and doing things. We'd gone through a couple of mergers. I was given a chance for an early retirement, and I did the Jerry Maguire show me the money, and I was willing to go out the door. I did what all good bankers do. And when I left the full-time banking job, I became a consultant, and it was a good run. And what I discovered though in the consulting, I was always having my clients give me one of these wags of the finger. Hey, come in here and shut the door. I need to talk about something. And I'm not going to say it's deep dark secrets, but they obviously were burdened by something going on, and they just wanted somebody to talk to. And I seemed to be a good fit for that, and they seemed to enjoy whatever we ended up talking about. And as I got tired of the consulting, the travel and being away from home and living in airports, I turned my attention to what it meant to become possibly a coach. And I started studying coaching principles. Um, I am certified by the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, and I've got a couple of other certifications that I've worked on and earned over the years. But what I've done is I've carried forward that passion for leadership development, and I've tried to help people figure out what it means to become a better leader wherever they are, whether it's a small business or a larger corporate setting. And I work with clients on both ends of the spectrum, and been doing the coaching for about 14 years now. I'm approaching 1,000 clients over that time period. I've got 35 active right now that I'm working with, and just love it. I love the ability to give back and really help people kind of get unstuck from whatever situation they find themselves in.
Consciousness is the next frontier. And at joegarner.net, we're exploring that frontier. Whether that's through one on one coaching, pre recorded programs, or free utilities to expand your awareness and your consciousness. Join me there and we'll expand what you believe is possible for your human experience. So learn more at joegarner.net and we'll expand your consciousness. Yeah, what a wonderful career path, and just again, I think it attributes to just following your passion, right? Like, does it? You would kind of mention that in the beginning, where parallel pathways that kind of just led up to this culmination and where you're at, and in life, I think that's very important to realize that it's not always what you're doing right now, but that there's an opportunity that is right around the corner that could be available to you if you just continue to follow that passion, that pull towards whatever it is that you're being pulled towards.
Agreed.
Now, we were talking the other day, and you had mentioned, you were kind of shifting a little bit into a different, you had been, business coaching, leadership coaching, but you're starting to see and feel like a little bit different pull towards something else. Maybe you can mention a little bit about that as well, like as far as what you're doing within the coaching experience.
Yeah, I think as the business world and the world around us in general has changed, and it's almost now too easy to throw a dart and blame COVID in 2020 for the big pivot, but it's undeniable there was a giant pivot in the way people think about their life, their work, what kind of work they want to do, how they want to show up if they are an employee. And that puts a burden on the leaders to try to figure out, how do I deal with these changing attitudes and changing mindsets and changing passions that people have. So perpetuating some old models about leadership just fundamentally doesn't work anymore.
Mm.
And that's where I'm trying to kind of repurpose and pivot my focus on helping people. And there's 3 or 4 really key themes that I'm seeing, and I've been watching them get a little bit bigger and bigger over the last 3 to 5 years. And one of them has to do with this sense of just sheer exhaustion. People that are in leadership roles are showing up to my coaching sessions expressing just real exhaustion. They're just tired. They're burning the candle at both ends. They're being asked to do more with less. They often feel like their teams aren't quite as motivated as they once were. So it's harder to get things done. The whole remote work dynamic is impacting people in negative ways. They don't feel connected like they once did. They've kind of lost that human centric opportunity to connect. And it's becoming a continuing roadblock. Then you compound all of that with the generational gaps that are in the workplace now. We technically today have 5 generations in the workplace, and that has never happened in history before. Uh,
Right.
and that is really causing a lot of people on both ends, excuse me, both ends of the spectrum to feel even further disconnected and further, they feel like, let's just say you're a boomer and you're trying to lead a team of Gen Zs, you feel like you can't even talk the same language, and vice versa.
Right.
The Gen X's and Gen Zs that are getting promoted up might still have some some boomers on their team, and they feel like they can't talk to them either. And it's a yin and yang that's going on in both directions. So these are some pretty dominant themes that keep coming out as people talk about their situation and their struggle, and to simply start talking to somebody about a 7-step program or here's 10 things you need to do. That just doesn't work anymore. You have
Mhm.
to really dig into these issues and challenge people with whatever learning they've had up to that point. And in some cases, I have to encourage people to unlearn a practice or a principle so that they can open the door for a new idea or a new way to get some things done.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's very important to help people understand is that you know, a lot of times the world is shifting, the world is changing, and if you're not adapting to that change, if you're not shifting with that change in the world, and again, from every metric possible, the world is changing faster and faster and faster, which requires the humans that are alive right now to evolve at a faster pace. And a lot of times, and I've experienced this with my clients as well, where it really is. It's an unlearning of the patterns that they grew up with, so that they can be open to these new ideas, these new perspectives, these new ways of thinking that would allow them to become successful again, to lead with passion and purpose and excitement. So, how do you get people to kind of examine their deepest held beliefs or their long-standing identities? What are some of the processes that help uncover those ideas?
Well, that's a great question, and this is where I think you and I align pretty well, and I'm basing that on what we talked about when you were on my show. I encourage people to do some really deep, somewhat soul-searching work to forget all the details and all the project deadlines and all the noise that's going on around them for a moment, and really ask people to think about core values and beliefs and begin building, in most cases for the first time, a true definition of a framework of the fundamental question I ask them is, what kind of leader do you want to be?
Mm.
If you could put it in words, how would you describe you for the leader you really want to be? And if you project out, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, and you're now leaving where you've been, what do you want people to say about you?
Mhm.
What is that story that you want told? And I can't tell you how many people, when I hit them with that idea, they kind of sit back and they go, I've never thought about that. I don't know. Not even sure I know where to start. And so I kind of lead them on a journey of thinking about examples. Perhaps you worked for someone that you did admire, you did respect, and there were two or three things that person did that helped garner that respect and that admiration or inspiration. And I said, if that thing that person did resonates with you, that's probably a clue that that's what you're wired to do as well. So put it on your list and let's start thinking about this. And I encourage people to think even outside the box. I mean, think about public figures, sports figures, historic figures, just anybody in human existence that you can think of that demonstrated some attribute of leadership that you think is a good one. That's probably a good one to put on your list.
Mhm.
And I use an analogy. I use golf as an example of what I'm trying to get them to think about. In the game of golf, by regulation, you put 14 clubs in your bag, and each of those clubs is designed to do something different. And it's about situational management. Wherever you find yourself on the golf course, you pick a club that's going to give you the best outcome for the moment, and you hopefully have learned how to swing that club effectively, and you make your next shot, and then you walk to where the ball is, and you've got a new situation, new circumstance. You're going to likely have to pick a different club to be effective. And these attributes of leadership that are in this framework I'm trying to get people to build are just that. They're different tools, different abilities, different skills, different styles that you can pick and choose from as the moment dictates. And you can apply those principles in the moment to hopefully get the better outcome. And
Mhm. I
just
like
like
I
a
like that.
golfer can technically finish a round of golf using his putter all the way, you're probably not going to have a really good score. You're going to get there, but it's not going to be as effective as it could be. And there are plenty of golfers that even though they've got the clubs in their bag, they haven't really done the practice and the work to really get effective at using them, certainly not to a pro level, but even on a weekend level, their game maybe never goes beyond a certain level, just simply because of practice and training and coaching and things they need to get better at it. So these skills and abilities that you identify and values you want to bring forward in this definition of leadership, you got to practice at them. You got to get help developing them. You you may find that you develop a whole range of abilities, but you get promoted and the new job requires something else that you don't yet have and you're not really haven't worked on. And I love the phrase talking about promotions, new level, new devil. There's always new
Mm.
details about a new higher promote promotion type level. And it may challenge everything you know as a leader, and you may have to kind of reset and modify and redefine or add something to help you get through that next step.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, what you're teaching people, especially with 5 generations of humans in the workforce, is that you're going to need different clubs with different situations, like different, you can't use your driver on every single person. Maybe the driver is good for, the boomers and motivating boomers to get the work done and bust it out. But a driver being that same tactic being used on Gen X, Gen Z, kind of these younger generations is going to be not as effective. You'll be able to use it, but will you be able to keep that employee motivated? Will you be able to keep that employee excited to come to work every day? Possibly, but most likely you're going to need a different tool, different way of approaching people. So yeah, the framework is wonderful. I'm wondering, kind of turning it around on you, like who have been your inspirations for your leadership, the type of leadership that you want to have, and what's your why? What's your fundamental reason? I mean, you've mentioned it that service has always been kind of that driving factor, but I'm curious if it goes deeper than just service too, and
Well,
if there is a
yes.
deeper understanding.
For me, it really does. And it goes all the way back and starts with my family story. I was the only child of a hardworking single mom. My father had passed away when I was just 2 years old, but even then, they were not together. They had marital troubles. My dad was an alcoholic. My mother had had trouble carrying children. I was actually her fifth attempt at having a child. She had lost four before I came along, and um, our family doctor knew her whole story. And when she became pregnant with me, he said, "You've got to make a choice. It's either your child or your husband, but you can't have both." And
Mm.
she said bye bye to him. And but he was so far down the track. I mean, he died of liver failure at 47 years old. That's how bad an alcoholic he was.
Mm.
But as I began to grow and mature, she had the wisdom to surround me with mentors. She recruited mentors to help me, and probably the first major one that I really remember the best is I was a Boy Scout, and my Boy Scout leader was a amazing man, salt of the earth. He wasn't a headline superstar, a big industry titan or anything. In fact, he was a plumber by trade, but he was just a great guy and always willing to talk and share and teach. And it just continued. So, from like third grade up to my senior year in high school, I always had 3 or 4 people I could turn to if I had an issue or a question or something that should have been a so-called male influence in my life. I had people to go to. I had a whole team of them around me that I could rely upon, and it it became second nature for me to ask for that kind of mentorship. When I went off to college, I quickly identified several staff and faculty people at the university that I, I would watch them, I would hear them, I would listen, and I would see. And it's kind of like that thing. If I saw an attribute that they were demonstrating that I was curious about, I would go up to them and I'd say, "Is there any chance I can hang around here and just observe or talk or walk, and see what's going on and learn?" And they were very gracious and giving to say, "Sure, just whenever." Um, One of my main mentors at my university was a gentleman that was the director of our student center. I mean, he was a career staff educator and a great guy, visionary. His name was Wayne Stark, and there's an art gallery on the campus to this day that's named in his honor. But he did that with a lot of students, and in between classes, I would just pretty much go over to his office and just hang out. And he would make his phone calls, he would do his meetings, he would talk to people, and he would proceed with his business. But I was always able to sit in, listen in, observe, watch, ask questions. That was just his method of operation. And I learned a tremendous amount, both in substance and style, from him. And it just became a kind of a lifelong habit for me. If I found myself in a new situation, I would find somebody in the organization. I did it on my military base. I didn't just limit myself to my chain of command. If I met somebody, a more senior officer that um, I I earned a, I learned a great respect for, I would reach out to them and I would do the same thing. Say, trying to develop and grow as an officer. You seem to do this one thing very well. Would you mind sharing with me how you got there? How'd you learn it? How'd you figure it out? And that's been just a lifelong journey for me.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's so, from my perspective, that's so different than the experience of me growing up and some of the younger generations of kind of feeling like we've had to figure it out on our own, figure everything out with, um, you know, uh, never feeling like we could ask for as much help as we should have been. So, just to kind of see the difference between your generation and our generation, and understand that a lot of times, our generation is afraid or just don't want to necessarily ask for help because we feel like we have everything at our fingertips. We should be able to figure it out on our own. And asking for help sometimes feels like a weakness or a
Yeah.
just not enoughness. And yeah, to let people know and understand that it's okay. Like, ask for help, talk to people, get people's perspective on what you're doing and how you're doing it, because that's the only way you're going to grow and learn is through having somebody to reflect back what you're doing, what you're experiencing, how your beliefs are shaping how you show up in the world.
Yeah. Well, the interesting part of the economy in this idea is that those people that are demonstrating good influence and leadership skills probably learned it much the same way. They had mentors, they had guides, they had uh, people that they followed and learned from, and now they've elevated themselves up to certain levels, and they are generally more than willing to give back. All it takes is
Mm.
somebody walking in and saying, "Would you talk to me?" And I was asked recently on another show I did, the host asked me the question, "Does anybody say no?" And I said, "Generally, no." No, they
Right.
don't say no. The dynamic is what they might say is, "I would love to, I just can't right now."
Hmm.
I will make a note. I'm honored by the invite. I will fit it in, we'll work it in, and let me get back to you. And, that is the closest thing to a no that I've gotten, and when you think about it, it's not a no, and it does end up happening. So, as I've coached people to think about this principle, one today in today's world, the quick reaction is, "Oh, but they're just way too busy. They're busier than I am, and I'm busy. I'm exhausted." Back to my earlier point, I,
Hmm.
I just I don't feel good about putting that burden on them to do it. What would that look like? How does that work? And I tell them, "Well, you don't know till you try," and inevitably they come back and go, miraculously, they said yes, they would love to. And that's my point. I think people that have the valuable experiences and skills and traits that you might want to emulate, they got them pretty much the same way. And so they understand the dynamic of being a mentor to somebody, being an advisor, being a little bit of a coach. They and they're at a place they're willing to give back and they're willing to
Hmm.
perpetuate and share.
And that's just a human. I think that's an innate human trait. That's how we've evolved as a species,
It
right?
is.
The only way that we've evolved as a species is that we passed information down from one generation to the next,
That's right.
oftentimes through stories. Not always through technical knowledge, but we passed it down through stories of how to be in the world, how to act in the world, how to show up in the world. And then of course there's technical stuff as well, how to hunt rabbits, or, if you're in the Serengeti, how to not get eaten by lion, these skills and tools. And it's just born innate. Like, humans want to teach the next generation of humans how to be better at being a human, how to learn from their lessons, so that, again, we can continue to build on the shoulders of the generations before us.
That's
And
right.
that's how the civilization, that's how the species evolves and continues to evolve. And on the show, we talk a lot about the evolution of human species, and the evolution of not just the species from a technical standpoint, but from the idea that we're evolving higher levels of senses. So our interconnectedness, our ability to be empathic with other humans, our ability to kind of communicate non-physically. These are all types of evolution that I think that the human species is going through. And then how do we bring that into the business world? How do we bring this idea of unconscious communication back into the business world to use it as effectively as possible? And just, it's very interesting to kind of see how all of this is coming together, and the use of technology as well. Like, the use of technology is one way that information can be spread faster, wider, and more, I would say, ubiquitously. Like, the information that is available to people right now is crazy compared to even 30 or 40 years ago. Again, looking through, I remember having encyclopedias and being like, man, if I read every single encyclopedia, I would know what everybody else on the world knew. But the logistics of that, the idea of that, is just mind blowing. So now we have an AI system which you can type in any question in the world, get the answer fairly consistently, and it's probably going to be at least 80% truthful, at least 80% correct. And how that kind of plays into the next evolution of the species is going to be fascinating, I think, to see. So we didn't quite touch on it, but I'm curious as to, kind of getting a little bit into the why. Like, what has always been driving you as far as giving back, or this idea of service to others? I know, the mentors and stuff like that, but is there a deeper level to that you can kind of put
Absolutely.
into words? The journey to finding myself started with a shift in how I viewed my health. That is why I am proud to partner with Purium, the transformation company. What if you could support your health with a system designed for today's challenges? Purium is more than a supplement company. It's a solution for regenerative health. Their whole food products include the only clinically proven glyphosate detox, helping you eliminate the top.
Yeah, there's always for me been a certain set of drivers that have existed, and I've tried to stay as true and aware of them as I can. In simple terms, the original thing was just sort of this feeling of wanting to be able to serve a greater good. I truly believe there was something in the world that was much bigger than I am, and I want to be a part of that. And um, so I've kind of tried to stay conscious. I've tried to keep that channel open and the dial, turned on, um, and pay attention, and realize sometimes if I found myself in a situation I was feeling maybe particularly frustrated or downhearted about it, when I thought about it, I realized I had started taking a detour off the path I wanted to be on, and I would
Mm.
need to kind of come back to center and get that done. But really did some deeper work in that a couple of years ago. I discovered the Why Institute. And most everybody at this point knows, and I think I saw a headline the other day that this is actually the 15th anniversary of Simon Sinek's famous TED Talk of Start with Why. When he did that talk, there was a gentleman named Gary Sanchez. He's actually Dr. Gary Sanchez. He was a dentist. He was at a little bit of a midlife pivot point. I don't want to say midlife crisis, but he was searching for greater good and bigger meaning, had a very successful practice, but, as he tells his own story, he was searching for more. He heard Simon's TED Talk and was fascinated by the concept of know your why. He stalked Simon for almost a year, trying to get in touch with him to take a phone call. Simon finally did, and on the call, Gary asked him, "Do you have a tool? Do you have an assessment that can help me understand my why?" And at that point in time, Simon's answer was, "No, I don't. I just know you got to do it." And that's kind of like,
Mhm.
really? And so the question was still there. So Gary embarked on a journey of quizzing people that he knew, well accomplished business leaders of all kinds, um, people that he could respect. And what he discovered, he did over 1,000 manual one-on-one interviews and collected the data and did an analysis and realized that from his study, there are truly only 9 whys in all of mankind.
Mm.
And people have them to different degrees, but there's always one dominant one that stands out as the real answer to your why. And um, in well, and let me elaborate. So then, as Simon's talk goes on, he talks about the how and the what. Why do you do what you do? How are you going to do it? And what are you going to do to make it come to fruition? So Gary continued his study and realized that the answer for the how and the what is also among the 9 whys, but they show up in slightly lesser degrees when you put the puzzle together. But
Mm.
you get this, and I keep promising myself one day I'm gonna go statistically and figure out what if you take 9 elements and you do all the various combinations, 9 times 9 times 9 and whatever that is,
Yeah. 9
how many
factorial.
mutations there can be of that combination, that explains the wide variety of mankind, right? So,
Mhm.
in my case, my why has to do with finding a better way. I am driven by looking for a better way to solve whatever might be in front of me. And, that can be a good thing as a driver because, if you're a visionary for a company, that's why you probably started the company. You think you've got a better idea, the proverbial better mousetrap.
Mhm.
For every one of the whys, there's a plus and a minus, and when you learn your why, you have to be cognizant of how you might show up. In my case, being driven by finding a better way, if I'm not careful, I can sound like I'm dismissing your idea. You give me an idea, my brain's going to kick in and go, "Oh, that's curious. That's interesting. I wonder if there's a better way." I'm not trying to be
Mhm.
critical of your idea. I'm just naturally wired that way to say, "Oh, that's awesome. That could be good. Now, what if, we did this and what if we added that?" And if I'm not careful, I can make people feel like I don't think much of their ideas.
Mm.
So I need to work hard when we engage, I have to honor what they said. I have to uh, keep it alive and keep it well and, keep it nurturing, even though I may be driving for that better way. And to give you a small example, when I learned this about myself, I realized the very first example of how it manifests for me is when I've got my list of errands to run and chores to do on Saturday. If I've got to get in the car and go make a half dozen stops at different places, I immediately think about the sequence I'm going to do that in. I
Mm-hmm.
put a logic together and say, oh, I don't want to waste gas. I don't want to waste time. I want to find a better way to put this list together. And, if one of my stops is get ice cream for dinner, well, I want to make that last because I don't want to make the ice cream melt in my car, while I'm doing all the other stuff. So all those kind of things just come naturally to me. And it can drive my wife crazy. She has the list and she said, let's just go. And I'm going, no, we got to think about this. We have to. So, and for me, then the other thing, so better way is my why. My how is to find mastery. And maybe that sounds like a strange word, but when I'm introduced to a concept, I don't want to just hear the concept. I want to really dive into it. I
Mm-hmm.
want to exhaust the depth and breadth of it. I want to learn more about it. I want to really lean into it and really study it to death, analyze it to death, get other input, get other things so that I feel like I really have a grasp on it. I don't want to just be able to talk casually about something.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, my what is, surprise, surprise, contribute. And that's kind of that service theme that emerged. I want to be able to be part of a greater good. And when I learned this, and Dr. Sanchez calls this the why operating system. We talked a lot about computer operating systems and entrepreneur operating systems. Well, this is your why operating system. When you really learn and study your why, how, and what, you then can really get an insight into how you're showing up in the world, and you can be proactive about the things that are good in each of those attributes, but you can also be cautious and protective about the possible dark side of what they represent to others around you, so you don't disrupt any kind of
Mm-hmm.
momentum or create friction on a team, for instance.
Right. Yeah. I think that's. I didn't realize that was another. It's similar to Briggs Meyer or one of the kind of understanding who you are at a fundamental level,
Right.
and that's just another tool, another aspect, another key component of what makes you do the things that you do. And I
Right.
think finding that out, understanding that is a key part of your experience in life. Understanding what your default settings are, and then deciding, do I want to keep those default settings or do I want to maybe evolve those default settings with awareness? And having awareness of those default settings allows you to choose, do I want to be this type of person, or do I want to, kind of maybe be a little bit more balanced, a little bit more in the middle, a little bit more, aware of that process, but letting it go, letting it not define me from a what I would call subconscious level.
Right. Right.
Which is powerful stuff. Yeah, really appreciate you sharing that deeper why, and I believe you can go to y.os. Is that correct? And or is it?
Well, I have a page on my own website that links it all up. People can go to dougthorpe.com/why. And
Mm,
there's information about taking the online assessment. It's a simple tool. It's $97, and you get the full write up of the correlation between your three elements: your why, how, and what, all
beautiful.
personalized.
Yeah. Well, as we start to kind of get to the end of the show, I always ask this last question for all my guests. Fundamentally, it does appear that we're going through this massive shift on the planet. The consciousness is changing. From a leadership perspective, how do you see this all playing out over the next 5 years or so? Like, what is the idea of leadership moving towards that is different than the way that we've done it for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years?
Great question, and I think the overarching theme is that the notion that you can create one style and that's going to fit everything is just dead. I mean, it is a concept that's dead on arrival in the modern world. I think leaders need to embrace the idea of being able to become more flexible, become more resilient in being able to shift and pivot what they think and how they're going to approach situations. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to abandon a core belief system. I'm not, it is very fair for leaders to think about, and I do this when I'm working with folks about establishing that leadership framework that they want to pursue. Eh, I totally embrace the idea there are non-negotiables people feel about their life. Maybe it's their worldview, maybe it's their religion, maybe it's their fundamental, moral upbringing. There are potentially things they're just not going to compromise, and that's fine. However, if you're going to do that, or I don't want to say that in a conflicting way, it's a both and. If you're going to do that, you need to figure out where the boundaries are, and you
Mm,
need to be ever mindful of the situations you're allowing yourself to get into, and just don't agree to go into a situation where those things are going to be called in question. You've got to find a different opportunity to participate. So there's no point in creating that kind of friction if you have a certain set of non-negotiables. But it's important, particularly if you're going to take on a management or a leadership role, that you got to do the work to figure that out. Yeah, and you need to establish that, and you need to use that as your launch pad of how you are going to be showing up in the world around you, knowing that you're probably going to have to be some degree of flexible depending on the situation. You're going to have to be empathetic. You're going to have to be far more human centered than maybe we ever have been in management roles. And that's just table stakes now. That's the way people are coming to work. I think the biggest thing that happened from an employment standpoint post COVID was people reevaluated the whole dynamic of where work fits into their life.
mhm,
And people are willing to quickly walk away from a situation that doesn't serve their idea of the harmony or the condition they want to exist in.
mm.
And if work is going to be too detrimental to a family situation, people are going to be far quicker to resign today than they ever have been.
Right. Do you see this as a positive? As a positive for humanity? As a positive for the business world?
Well, it's definitely been a shock to the business world because businesses, I think, historically counted on some people just, I'll use the phrase, suck it up and deal with it.
Mhm.
If they created a policy or put out a new directive. Um, but I think in the modern world, people are their fuse for suffering that is very, very short. And companies have to be very delicate about, massive dictates about policy. Like there are companies that are on record right now, they have totally blown the call for return to work.
Mhm.
They set out policies that were way too restrictive, way too prohibitive. And in most of those cases, in 60 days, they had massive turnover
Yeah.
if they really tried to, force like 4 days back or, something like that. Um,
Mhm.
People had just created a lifestyle that worked too well for them to not have to do that and not have to burn the hour and a half or 2 hours, sometimes 3-hour commute time to go to an office or a factory somewhere. People just aren't willing
Right.
to do that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to make sense if you emulate kind of the natural world, which some would argue is probably the most intelligent way that things have been designed through series of evolution. Take your physical body, for instance. The physical body is connected through the nervous system. Every single part communicates with every other single part in a very effective way. And when there's a top-down approach, let's say for whatever reason, the heart said, well, we're going to all act as if we're heart cells, and we're going to, use that frame of reference to make all of our decisions. Well, the body would just fall apart. It would not work as it does without the intelligence of every single aspect. And I think that's just a realization that maybe we went a little bit too far with this top-down approach, and moving a little bit more towards this, we'll call it flatter, more inclusive, where everybody gets a say. Not, obviously the people at the top have the final say, but they're taking information from every single level instead of it just being this, oh, well, we got to the top, we're the smartest people, this is how we're going to do things. People really are starting to value the input of even the lowest level employees or benefactors of the organization, which I find it very beneficial. I think any organization that is run that way is going to outperform, is going to absolutely dismantle any organization that is run strictly from a top-down approach. And that's a lot of what we're seeing in the world is these, behemoths of companies that, when you have 150, 200,000 employees, to change the way that you've structured your business takes years and years and years. And they're just falling further and further and further behind to these newer organizations that are faster, more adaptable, and easier to maneuver when it comes to these massive shifts that are happening. Again, adoption of AI, or even in the internet era, the adoption of internet. Those fast moving companies were the ones that ended up being on top. The
Right.
Googles, the Facebooks. We've seen that run, and maybe they seem to be doing a pretty good job of staying at the front of AI, but there's so many opportunities for other smaller organizations that have these maybe more empathetic or empathic capabilities to really step forward and shine light into how business is done.
Yep. Agreed.
So, well, Doug, this was wonderful. I really appreciate you coming on.
You bet.
If anybody is interested in connecting with you or working one-on-one with you, what's the best place to send them?
Best place to start that is to come to my website at dougthorpe.com, THORPE, and there's a button there to ask for a free consultation. I'm happy to schedule some time, just talk you through your story and understand what you might be facing and wanting to think about. We'll talk about what I or my team might be able to do to help, and if there's a situation that makes sense, we'll do it. If not, we'll share some great information, and I always love meeting new people that are highly motivated. So would love to talk with you. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm pretty much on all my social media, all the main ones anyway, but direct to the website will get the fastest reaction.
Perfect. So I'll make sure I include that link in the show notes down below. Yeah, really appreciate you coming on today, Doug. And for those listening at home, I do have a new program. It's a 4-week just crash course into how to better understand your mind so that you can take control. If you feel like you're overwhelmed, burned out, just, your mind has taken control over how you're experiencing life. Just a 4-week little quick reset is very helpful, and you can check all of the information out at joegarner.net. So thanks again, Doug. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and hopefully we'll stay connected and maybe catch up again sometime in the future.
Would love.
Thank you again for listening to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the podcast, hit the bell to know when a new show comes out, share with a friend, and rate us on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It helps get these messages out to more people to create the collective shift in reality we are here to experience. Make sure you interact with the Q&A and poll sections of the show so I can continue to provide content you enjoy. Finally, check out my website in the show notes to become a VIP of Changing the Channel and join the shift that is happening.